The communications center at Forward Operating Base Titan was supposed to be the safest place on the entire installation. 20 feet underground, reinforced concrete walls 3 feet thick, accessible only through a single corridor with multiple security checkpoints. It was designed to survive mortar attacks, rocket strikes, even a direct hit from anything short of a bunker-buster bomb. Staff Sergeant Emma Rose had worked in that center for 6 months, monitoring radio traffic, coordinating communications between units in the field, making sure information flowed smoothly up and down the chain of command. It was important work, critical work, but it wasn't combat. She sat at her station wearing a headset, typing on keyboards, managing data streams. Safe, secure, far from the actual fighting, which is exactly what the enemy had counted on when they planned their infiltration. Emma was 3 hours into her midnight shift, coordinating communications for a patrol that had made contact with insurgents about 15 clicks north of the FOB. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, relaying coordinates to fire support, updating the Tactical Operations Center, making sure everyone who needed information had it in real time. Falcon 2-6, this is TOC, fire mission confirmed. Arty splash in 30 seconds, danger close, all friendly personnel acknowledge and take cover, she transmitted, her voice professionally calm despite the urgency of the situation. The radio crackled back. TOC, Falcon 2-6, all personnel in cover, ready for Arty, standing by. Emma counted down in her head, monitoring multiple screens simultaneously. Radio traffic, satellite imagery, unit positions, threat assessments. This was what she was good at, this multi-dimensional chess game where information was power and timing was everything. The artillery impacted exactly on schedule. Through the radio net, she could hear the thunder of explosions, followed by Falcon 2-6's voice reporting effect on target. Enemy contact broken, 2 friendly wounded, requesting medevac. Falcon 2-6, TOC copies. Medevac is inbound. ETA 12 minutes. Designate LZ with purple smoke, Emma transmitted, already coordinating with the medevac unit, making sure pilots had all the information they needed. It was routine. Intense, high-stakes routine, but routine nonetheless. She'd handled dozens of situations like this, maybe hundreds. The communications center hummed with quiet efficiency around her, 6 other operators at their stations, each managing their own piece of the battlefield, the watch officer monitoring everything from his elevated position, making sure the machine ran smoothly. That's when the lights went out. Not flickering, not dimming, just instant, complete darkness. The kind that only happens when power is cut deliberately, when someone knows exactly which circuits to sever to kill primary and backup systems simultaneously. Emergency lighting kicked in after 3 seconds, bathing everything in red. Emma's training took over immediately. Her hand moved to the emergency radio on her vest. Every operator wore one, designed to work even if all the fancy equipment failed. TOC to security, we just lost main power, need status check on... She never finished the sentence. The sound of gunfire erupted from the corridor outside, the distinctive crack of M4 rifles mixing with the deeper boom of AK-47s, shouting in accented English, return fire, then screaming. The watch officer, Captain James Morrison, was already moving, his sidearm drawn. All personnel, we are under attack. Arm yourselves. Establish defensive positions. The door exploded inward, not opened, exploded. Whoever was coming through had used breaching charges, blowing the reinforced door off its hinges, sending it crashing into the room trailing smoke and debris. Emma dove behind her console, her hand finding the M4 carbine she kept secured under her desk. Required equipment for everyone in the FOB, even communications operators who theoretically would never need it. 4 men came through the shattered doorway, dressed in a mix of military gear and civilian clothes, faces covered, weapons up and firing. They moved with professional coordination, each covering a sector, their tactics suggesting training well beyond typical insurgent forces. Captain Morrison got off 2 shots before taking rounds to the chest. His body armor caught them, but the impact knocked him backward over his desk. 2 other operators went down in the first exchange, neither moving afterward. Emma's world narrowed to tunnel vision, adrenaline flooding her system. She brought her M4 up from behind the console, flipped the safety selector to fire, and did something she'd been trained to do but never thought she'd actually need to do outside a range qualification. She started shooting back. But before we show you what happens when armed insurgents break into a communications center expecting to find defenseless support personnel, and instead encounter someone with a very specific and very dangerous skill set that nobody knew about, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Because what's about to unfold in this underground facility will prove that some warriors don't advertise their capabilities until the moment those capabilities become necessary. Emma's first 3-round burst caught the lead attacker in the chest, his body armor absorbing the rounds but staggering him backward. Her training was taking over, years of muscle memory that had nothing to do with sitting at a communications console and everything to do with a past she didn't talk about, a past that most people on this FOB didn't even know existed. The attackers had expected to overwhelm a room full of support personnel, people whose primary weapons were keyboards and radios, people who would freeze or surrender when confronted with armed violence. They had not expected return fire, especially not accurate return fire from someone who clearly knew what they were doing. Emma moved, not staying in one position, using her knowledge of the room's layout to her advantage. She fired another burst, this time going for headshots, and the lead attacker went down for real, his weapon clattering from nerveless hands. "Ranger qualified," she shouted, not to intimidate the attackers but to inform any other defenders in the room. "I've got training. Rally on me." Rally. 3 attackers remained, and they were adapting fast, taking cover, returning fire with disciplined bursts rather than panicked spraying. These weren't amateurs. One of them shouted something in Pashto, coordinating with his companions, and they began to flank, trying to pin Emma down while another moved to get an angle on her. She recognized the tactic immediately, basic small unit movement, the kind taught to infantry all over the world, but she also knew how to counter it. Instead of staying defensive, she went on the offensive, something most people wouldn't expect from a communications operator. Emma bounded to her left, firing a burst to suppress the flanker, then rolled behind another console. The attacker on the right had expected her to stay put, to play defense. He was moving toward her last position, weapon-oriented wrong, when she came up from her new position and put him down with controlled fire. 2 left. But 2 was still too many, especially when they started getting smart. One threw a flashbang toward her position, not a lethal grenade, meant to disorient rather than kill. They wanted prisoners, she realized, wanted intelligence or hostages or both. The flashbang detonated, but Emma had already squeezed her eyes shut and turned away, having seen it coming. The blast was still disorienting, her ears ringing, but she'd minimized the effect. She kept moving, muscle memory guiding her toward the armory locker on the far wall. More shooting from the corridor outside. Security forces responding to the breach, but they were being held back by what sounded like a substantial force. This wasn't a random attack. This was a coordinated assault, multiple elements, professionals who'd studied the FOB's defenses and found a weakness. Emma reached the armory locker, her fingers finding the combination lock by feel, years of repetition making the motion automatic even with her vision still recovering from the flashbang. The lock clicked open. Inside were fragmentation grenades, smoke grenades, additional ammunition, and something she'd never thought she'd actually need to use, her old combat kit from when she'd been someone very different. She grabbed a frag grenade, pulled the pin, counted to 2, and threw it toward where the last 2 attackers had taken cover. The explosion was deafening in the confined space, shrapnel tearing through equipment and flesh alike. One attacker's scream cut off abruptly. The other, wounded but still mobile, tried to retreat toward the breached doorway. Emma didn't let him make it. 3 controlled shots, center mass, and he went down. The communications center fell into relative silence, broken only by the ringing in her ears, the distant sounds of fighting in the corridor, and the harsh rasp of her own breathing. 4 attackers down. Captain Morrison groaning, alive but hurt. 2 other operators not moving. Emma conducted an immediate tactical assessment. She was in a hardened facility that was currently under assault by an unknown number of enemy forces. Communications equipment was mostly destroyed. The single exit was compromised. Security forces were engaged elsewhere. She was effectively cut off, with wounded personnel, limited ammunition, and no way to call for help through normal channels. "Operator Hayes, you still functional?" she called to one of the other communication specialists, a young specialist who was huddled behind his overturned desk, eyes wide with shock. Yes, Sergeant, I think so. How did you—" "My history's complicated," Emma interrupted, moving to check on Captain Morrison. "Right now, we need to focus on survival. Can you get any communications working? Emergency frequencies, anything?" "The main systems are fried," Hayes reported, his training overriding his shock as he focused on the problem. "But I might be able to jury-rig something with the backup transceivers if you can give me 5 minutes." "You've got 3, Emma said, checking Morrison's wounds. The body armor had stopped the rounds, but he had what looked like cracked ribs and possibly internal injuries. "Captain, can you hear me?" "Reed," Morrison gasped, using her last name. "What? How?" "I used to be 75th Ranger Regiment," Emma explained shortly, applying pressure to a bleeding wound on his side where a round had caught him under the armor. "4 deployments, 2 with a Ranger battalion, 2 on special assignment. I got out, retrained as communications, thought I'd have a quieter career. Guess that didn't work out." "You're a Ranger?" Morrison looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, which in a way he was. The person he'd known as his competent but quiet communications operator had just killed 4 armed insurgents in close-quarters combat. "Was a Ranger," Emma corrected. "Still got the training, though." "Now shut up and don't move. I need to stop this bleeding before—" More shooting from the corridor, closer this time. Emma grabbed her M4, moved to a position where she could cover the breached doorway. Through the smoke and emergency lighting, she could see movement, multiple figures trying to advance through the corridor, being held back by defensive fire from the FOB's security forces. But the security forces were pulling back. She could hear it in the pattern of fire, the way the shooting was moving away from the communications center. They were being pushed back or repositioning, which meant this facility was about to be completely overrun. "Hayes, status on comms," Emma called. "Working on it. I've got power to 1 transceiver, trying to find a working frequency." An explosion rocked the facility, dust and debris raining from the ceiling. They were using heavy ordnance, possibly RPGs or satchel charges, systematically clearing rooms as they advanced through the underground complex. Emma made a tactical decision. They couldn't stay here. The communications center had 1 entrance, which made it defensible but also made it a trap. If the enemy brought up heavy weapons or just decided to seal the entrance, they'd be buried alive or starved out. "Hayes, forget the comms. We're moving," she ordered. "Grab a weapon from one of the attackers, get the medical kit from the locker. We're conducting a tactical withdrawal." "To where?" Hayes asked, but he was already moving, following orders, his training kicking in despite his fear. "Service tunnels," Emma replied. She'd studied the FOB's layout extensively during her first week here. Old Ranger habits died hard. Always know your exits, always have an escape route. "There's a maintenance access point behind the server racks. Leads to the water treatment system, which connects to the surface through an emergency egress shaft. We can get out, get clear, call in support." "What about Captain Morrison?" Hayes asked, looking at the wounded officer. "We carry him," Emma said flatly. "We don't leave people behind." "Ranger Creed, number 5. Help me get him up." Together they hauled Morrison to his feet, his arms draped over their shoulders. Emma grabbed her M4 with her free hand, took point, leading them toward the back of the communications center while checking corners and covering angles with practiced efficiency. The server racks were 6 feet tall, arranged in rows, their indicator lights dead without main power. Behind them, exactly where Emma remembered from the facility schematics she'd studied, was a narrow maintenance hatch secured with a simple padlock. Emma shot the lock off, the sound shockingly loud in the enclosed space. She pulled the hatch open, revealing a dark tunnel barely wide enough for a person to navigate, definitely not designed for moving wounded personnel. "This is going to be tight," she warned. "Hayes, you go first. I'll help the captain through. Then I'll bring up rear security. Move slow, stay quiet, don't use lights unless absolutely necessary." Hayes nodded, his face pale but determined, and squeezed through the hatch into the maintenance tunnel. Emma helped Morrison through next, the captain biting back groans of pain as his injured ribs protested the movement. More explosions from the main corridor, shouting in multiple languages, Pashto, Arabic, and accented English. The enemy was consolidating their hold on the communications center, probably calling in more forces, preparing to exploit whatever intelligence they could extract from the facility. Emma took one last look at the room where she'd spent 6 months, thinking she'd left the dangerous part of her life behind. 4 dead attackers, destroyed equipment, blood and smoke, and the evidence of violence that she'd hoped to never encounter again. Then, she climbed into the maintenance tunnel, pulled the hatch shut behind her, and focused on the immediate problem: getting her people out alive. The tunnel was exactly as miserable as she'd anticipated. Cramped, dark, filled with pipes and conduits that caught on equipment and uniforms. They moved in single file, Hayes in front, Morrison in the middle, supported by both of them, Emma bringing up the rear with her weapon oriented backward, covering their escape route. Every sound was magnified in the confined space, their breathing, Morrison's occasional groans, the scrape of boots on metal. Emma counted their progress by memorized distances. The maintenance tunnel was supposed to be 200 meters long, connecting to a junction where it met the water treatment system's service corridor. They'd covered maybe 50 meters when Emma heard it, voices behind them, muffled but audible, coming from the communications center. The enemy had found the hatch. "Move faster," Emma whispered urgently. "We've got pursuit." Hayes picked up the pace as much as the tight confines allowed, pulling Morrison along with Emma's help. The captain was fading in and out of consciousness now, his breathing shallow, probably going into shock from blood loss and pain. Emma could hear the hatch opening behind them, voices speaking in Pashto, discussing whether to follow into the tunnel. One voice, sounding like it held authority, ordered pursuit. Flashlight beams stabbed into the darkness behind them, 100 meters into the tunnel. Then 150. The junction appeared ahead, a wider space where the maintenance tunnel met the service corridor, offering marginally more room to maneuver. "Hayes, when we reach the junction, put Morrison down on the left side behind that pipe cluster," Emma ordered quietly. "Then take up position covering the corridor. I'm going to discourage our pursuers." "What are you going to—" Hayes started. "Just do it," Emma interrupted. "Trust me." They reached the junction. Hayes did as ordered, getting Morrison into the relative safety of cover. Emma moved to a position where she had a clear sightline back down the maintenance tunnel. The flashlight beams were closer now, maybe 30 meters, 2 figures moving in tactical formation. Emma pulled one of the frag grenades she'd grabbed from the armory locker, pulled the pin, counted to 2, the standard count to ensure the grenade exploded before someone could throw it back, and tossed it with precision born from countless training iterations, bouncing it off the tunnel ceiling to land approximately where those flashlight beams indicated targets. "Frag out," she called to Hayes. "Cover ears." The explosion in the confined tunnel was apocalyptic, the overpressure wave punishing even at their distance, the sound deafening despite covering their ears. The flashlight beams disappeared, screaming briefly, then nothing. "Move," Emma ordered, pulling Morrison back up. "That'll slow them down, but not for long. We need to reach the egress shaft." They moved through the service corridor, which was marginally wider than the maintenance tunnel, but still claustrophobic. Emma's mental map told her they were maybe 300 meters from the emergency egress shaft, which would take them to the surface on the far side of the FOB's perimeter, outside the area being actively assaulted. 200 meters. Morrison was dead weight now, unconscious from shock and exhaustion. Emma and Hayes were carrying him between them, their movement painfully slow, every step an effort. 100 meters. Emma could hear voices again, echoing through the service tunnels. The enemy was persistent, sending more forces to cut off their escape, probably splitting their forces to cover multiple routes. "Hayes, how are you holding up?" Emma asked quietly. "Terrified, exhausted, but functional," he replied honestly. "Sergeant, I just want you to know, whatever happens, you're the reason we're still alive. Thank you." "Thank me when we're safe," Emma said. "For now, keep moving." 50 meters. The egress shaft appeared ahead, a vertical shaft with a ladder leading up approximately 40 feet to a hatch on the surface. It was designed for emergency evacuation in case of catastrophic facility damage, with a manual release that could be operated from inside. But between them and the shaft, blocking their path with weapons raised, stood 3 insurgents who'd clearly anticipated this escape route. For a frozen moment, nobody moved. The insurgents had the advantage of position, established fields of fire, weapons already oriented toward the threat. Emma and Hayes were exhausted, burdened with a wounded man, caught in a bad position with limited cover. Emma's mind ran through tactical options in microseconds. They couldn't retreat. More enemies behind them. They couldn't surrender. That meant death or worse. They couldn't negotiate. The enemy clearly wanted them dead or captured, which left only one option: attack. Hayes, on my signal, drop Morrison and go left behind that pipe cluster, Emma said quietly, her voice barely audible. I'm going right. We engage simultaneously, suppress and advance, textbook battle drill. You remember training? Yes, but Sergeant, there's 3 of them. And we have surprise and desperation, Emma interrupted. Plus, I'm a ranger and you're army trained. That counts for something. On 3. 1, 2, 3. They dropped Morrison, dove in opposite directions, and brought their weapons to bear with adrenaline-fueled speed. Emma fired first, a long burst at the rightmost insurgent, driving him into cover. Hayes, to his credit, followed her lead without hesitation, engaging the left target. The center insurgent returned fire, his round stitching across the space where Emma had been a heartbeat before. She rolled, came up behind a vertical pipe, fired again, this time catching him with a controlled burst that put him down. The rightmost insurgent popped up from cover, trying to get an angle on Hayes. Emma transitioned smoothly, years of training making the movement automatic, and engaged him with precision fire. He went down. The leftmost insurgent, seeing his companions fall, broke and ran, disappearing into the tunnel system. Emma didn't pursue. She'd learned in Ranger School that sometimes letting one get away was smarter than overextending your position. Clear, she called. Hayes, status? I'm good. Holy shit, Sergeant, I can't believe we... Save it, Emma interrupted, moving to check on Morrison. The captain was still breathing, but barely. They needed to get him medical attention soon or he wasn't going to make it. Help me get him to the ladder. We're going topside. They hauled Morrison to the egress shaft, but the ladder presented a new problem. There was no way they could carry an unconscious man up 40 feet of vertical ladder. Emma stared up at the shaft, mind racing through options, none of them good. Hayes, you're going up first, she decided. Get topside, make sure it's clear, then I'll rig a harness and you'll help pull the captain up. It's going to be slow and exposed, but it's the only way. What about you? Hayes asked. I'll be right behind you. Now move. Hayes climbed, his ascent painfully slow in the emergency lighting. Emma covered the corridor, expecting more enemies to appear at any moment. Morrison's breathing was getting shallower. They were running out of time. A shout from above. Clear! It's clear up here. Thank God, Emma muttered. She quickly fashioned a harness from webbing and equipment straps, securing Morrison in a way that would allow him to be hauled up without strangling or dropping him. It wasn't pretty, but it would work. Hayes, I'm sending him up. Pull steady, don't jerk the line. She braced herself and started pushing Morrison up the ladder while Hayes pulled from above. Inch by painful inch, the unconscious captain ascended. Emma's arms burned with the effort, her muscles screaming from exhaustion and strain. Halfway up. 3/4. Then Morrison was at the top, Hayes hauling him through the surface hatch. Emma started her own climb, her M4 slung across her back, moving as fast as fatigue allowed. She was 20 feet from the surface when she heard boots in the corridor below. Multiple sets, moving fast. The enemy had tracked them to the egress shaft. Emma climbed faster, her legs and arms on fire. 10 feet. 5. Hands appeared through the hatch above, Hayes reaching down to help pull her up. Below, weapons fire erupted, rounds clanging off the ladder and walls, one round burning past close enough that she felt the heat. Then she was through. Hayes pulling her clear, both of them collapsing on the ground outside the hatch, gasping for breath. They were on the surface, outside the FOB's perimeter, the night sky overhead, the distant sound of fighting still audible from the base itself. Close it, Emma ordered, and together they slammed the hatch shut, engaging the locking mechanism from the outside. It wouldn't hold forever, but it would buy them precious minutes. Emma pulled out her emergency radio, the one she'd been carrying since the attack began. "Any station, this is Talk Actual. We are 3 personnel EV from the facility under attack. Require immediate assistance. Coordinates." She rattled off their position from memory. 1 urgent surgical, 2 ambulatory, multiple enemy forces in pursuit. How copy? Static. Then a voice, beautiful in its familiarity. "TOC Actual. This is Falcon 2-6. We copy your transmission. We are 3 minutes from your position. Hold tight. Cavalry's coming." Emma collapsed back against the ground, suddenly aware of how much she hurt, how exhausted she was, how close they'd come to dying in that underground tomb. Hayes was checking on Morrison, doing what he could with the limited medical supplies they'd brought. 3 minutes felt like 3 hours, but then Emma heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Rotor blades. A Black Hawk appeared over the ridgeline, descending fast, its door gunners scanning for threats. It touched down 30 meters from their position, medics already rushing out with a stretcher. Emma helped Hayes get Morrison loaded, then both of them climbed aboard. As the helicopter lifted off, she looked back at the fob, seeing smoke rising from multiple locations, tracer fire crisscrossing the compound, the whole base in chaos. "Sergeant Reed," the pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Command wants to know, did you manage to destroy sensitive materials before evacuating the communications center?" Emma thought about the frag grenade she'd used in the maintenance tunnel, about the destruction it would have caused if the attackers had managed to backtrack to the comms center, about the explosion that had probably been followed by secondary detonations as equipment and ammunition cooked off. "Affirmative," she reported. "Sensitive materials have been thoroughly destroyed." "Good copy." "You did good work tonight, Sergeant. Saved lives, prevented intelligence compromise. Command's going to want a full debrief." Emma closed her eyes, let her head fall back against the helicopter's bulkhead. She'd spent 6 months trying to be just a communications operator, trying to leave the dangerous part of her life behind. But tonight had proven what she'd always suspected. You could change your job title, but you couldn't change what you fundamentally were. She was a warrior. And sometimes, warriors didn't get to choose when they had to fight. 3 days later, Emma stood in the base commander's office at attention as Colonel Sarah Martinez reviewed her after-action report. Morrison was recovering in the hospital, serious injuries, but he'd live. Hayes had been recommended for a commendation for his actions during the escape. The Foe B had successfully repelled the attack, though at significant cost. "Staff Sergeant Reed," Colonel Martinez said, looking up from the report, "I have to admit, when I reviewed your personnel file after this incident, I was surprised. 4 years with the 75th Ranger Regiment, 2 combat deployments with a line battalion, 2 more deployments on special assignment, which I'm reading as classified operations, exemplary service record, Bronze Star, Army Commendation Medal with V device, Expert Infantryman Badge, Ranger Tab. And then you retrained as communications specialist?" "Yes, ma'am," Emma confirmed. "After my 4th deployment, I decided I needed a change. Thought I'd contribute to the mission in a different way, something less kinetic." "Well, your plan for a quiet career certainly got disrupted," Martinez observed with dry humor. "According to multiple witness statements, you single-handedly held off the initial assault on the communications center, killed or wounded multiple enemy combatants, then conducted a tactical withdrawal while protecting wounded personnel and evading pursuit through the facility's service tunnels. That's not the resume of a communications operator, Staff Sergeant." "No, ma'am," Emma agreed, "but it's the resume of someone who was trying very hard to be one." Martinez stood, walked around her desk, and extended her hand. "Well, Staff Sergeant, whether you like it or not, your secret's out. Word has spread through the entire command about the comms operator who turned out to be an elite warrior when things went sideways. You're being put in for another Bronze Star, possibly an upgrade to Silver Star, depending on how the awards board evaluates the action." Emma shook her hand. "With respect, ma'am, I was just doing my job." "Your job," Martinez repeated. "Which job would that be exactly?" Communications specialist or ranger? Both, ma'am, Emma replied. I'm good at communications work. I genuinely enjoy it. But if armed insurgents break into my facility and threaten my people, I'm going to respond the way I was trained to respond. The uniform might be different, but the warrior underneath doesn't change. No, Martinez agreed. It doesn't. Which is why I'm offering you a choice, Staff Sergeant. You can stay in your communications role if that's what you really want. Nobody's going to force you back into an infantry assignment. But I'd be lying if I said we couldn't use someone with your particular skill set in a more direct combat role. There's a special operations task force operating in this area that could benefit from someone who understands both the tactical and communications aspects of their mission. Your call. Emma thought about it. 6 months ago, she would have refused immediately, would have insisted she was done with the direct combat role. But that was before armed men had broken into her facility. Before she'd been forced to acknowledge that she couldn't outrun what she was, couldn't pretend the warrior part of her didn't exist, just because she was trying to do a different job. Can I think about it, ma'am? Emma asked. Take your time, Martinez said. But Staff Sergeant, whatever you decide, know this. You saved lives that night. Captain Morrison, Specialist Hayes, potentially dozens more if the enemy had seized the communication center and used it to coordinate attacks on our forces. You're a hero, whether you wear a communications headset or carry a rifle on the front lines. Don't forget that. Emma left the colonel's office, walked through the rebuilt FOB. They'd repaired most of the damage from the attack, filled the holes, replaced the equipment, strengthened the defenses. But she knew that no defense was perfect, that determined enemies would always find a way in, that security was an illusion, maintained only through constant vigilance. Hayes fell into step beside her as she walked toward the repaired communications center. Sergeant Reed, he said formally, then smiled. Or should I say, Ranger Reed? Emma's fine, she replied. We fought together, saved each other's lives. I think we're past the formal stuff. Emma, then, Hayes agreed. I heard the colonel offered you a transfer to a special operations unit. Word travels fast. This is a military base, Hayes pointed out. Word travels at light speed. So what are you going to do? Emma looked at the entrance to the communications center, the reinforced door, the security measures, the illusion of safety. Then she looked at the weapon she still carried, the M4 that had saved her life and the lives of her people. You know what the funny thing is? She said. I thought I wanted to stop being a warrior, to just be a support soldier doing important but safer work. But that night showed me something. I'm not a warrior because of my job title or my assignment. I'm a warrior because of who I am, what I've trained to be, what I'll always be when the situation demands it. So you're taking the transfer, Hayes guessed. I'm taking some time to think about it, Emma corrected. But yeah, probably. Because there's a difference between running from who you are and choosing how you apply what you are. I can be a communications expert and a combat operator. Those skills complement each other. Well, whatever you decide, Hayes said seriously, I just want to say thank you. You kept your head when everyone else was panicking, you fought like a demon, and you got us out alive. That's what Rangers do, right? That's the creed? That's the creed, Emma confirmed. Never leave a fallen comrade. And yeah, I guess once a Ranger, always a Ranger. You can change your job, but you can't change what the training made you. She thought about the question that had been whispered around the FOB after that night. Who was the communications operator who fought like a special forces soldier? The answer was simple and complex at the same time. She was Emma Reed. She was a communications specialist who happened to also be an Army Ranger. She was someone who'd tried to leave combat behind, only to discover that combat had followed her into what was supposed to be the safest room on the base. And when armed men had broken into her facility expecting to find defenseless support personnel, they'd instead encountered a warrior who'd been trying very hard to not be one anymore. That had been their fatal mistake. Emma smiled slightly, patted Hayes on the shoulder, and headed back to work. There were communications to manage, networks to monitor, information to coordinate. Important work, critical work. But her M4 stayed within easy reach, always loaded, always ready. because she'd learned a valuable lesson that night. You could be whatever job title the military gave you, but when armed enemies came through the door, job titles didn't matter. What mattered was whether you could fight. And Emma Reed could definitely fight. The next time someone asked who the communications operator was who'd held off an entire assault force, the answer would be simple. She was a warrior who happened to work in communications, and that combination, as the enemy had learned too late, was far more dangerous than either role alone. Never underestimate the quiet professionals, especially the ones who seem to be doing something safe, because sometimes the person at the desk is just a person at a desk, and sometimes they're a ranger waiting for a reason to remember what they used to be. The enemy had given Emma that reason, and they'd paid for it with their lives. Thanks for watching. Every woman has a story worth telling. Join us to hear them all.